Hello, everybody. Welcome to Elephant 6 of the DefCore cycle. We only have an hour today, so we're going to try and keep things moving pretty fast. Could I start with, I'm assuming people have access to Etherpad for roll call. Please update yourself on the Etherpad. All right. So the first thing I'd like to do is go through the agenda really quickly. Topics for the agenda. We have quite a bit, and I know we're not going to make everything.
No.
And if you're not talking, please mute. There's a lot of background noise from somebody.
But we do want to try to be calm.
All right, so these are things we've accumulated. Crowdsourcing data plan. Need help from the TC on documentation and capabilities. I think we actually have a list of things to talk about for the TC meeting, so we should. That's actually a topic in itself. Subcommittee update from the Bylaws Committee. Discuss becoming an OpenStack program. Discuss designated sections is actually the TC interlock. Let me put it there. That's the subtopic. Timeline for publication of results. So this is something that came up from the board meeting about not revealing test results from individual companies in this pass. We can talk if we need to. We can talk about that. Integration of the driver test is another action from the board meeting. So the driver test efforts were going to be integrated. I forgot to reach out to Boris to make sure he could come to this meeting.
Defer to Elephant 7 then?
Probably,
okay.
Jonathan. And then the thing that I really wanted to make sure we accomplish is a communication plan, because I am holding, there's at least 4 documents that I want broader review and publication on that we need to have some plan around. So let's specifically hold some things off for Elephant 7. So I think that since we don't have the right players, we're going to move that. I would also suggest we defer the timeline for publication off, and also the official OpenStack program off. Any objections on that?
Well, I would like to just make sure we're clarifying that it's an open question as to whether or not we become an official, whether we need an OpenStack program. I don't believe we do. I think there is either an existing program that we could tuck into, such as Infra or QA, or we should just represent that RefStack is a project of the board and therefore doesn't need a separate program. I think comms plan has to happen today. We'll have to see if we get enough of quorum of the bylaws subcommittee to actually do that topic today. We may have to push that off as well. Rob, do you know if Eileen Evans or Mark Radcliffe are going to make it?
Mark can't. I know that.
Okay.
And there's a TC response on this one also.
There's a TC response on the bylaws stuff.
Yeah, it was a topic at the TC meeting.
That seems weird.
It's not. I'll explain it when we get there. But so let's push this back, and I think the crowdsourcing the data is possibly on the bubble. So let's.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably do that in 30 seconds. The current plan is have the board members and the TC members beta test running TCUP and uploading data. And then there's an action that David and I were talking about in RefStack design to allow anyone with a login to vote on must-have capabilities using the RefStack scorecard interface.
Right. And you're making notes inside of the agenda.
Sorry. You're right. I will stop doing it that way. I always do it that way.
So we can start. So I think we're behind on the RefStack TCUP pieces. They've been slowed down by becoming part of the OpenStack Garrett process, which I think is a good thing ultimately, but definitely slowed us down a little bit on this. What we're gonna be asking I'm hoping next week for DefCore people to try it out. So DefCore testing should be next week. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good goal. I actually I should have tried to get David Lenwell to dial in briefly for this call, but I'll have him, if I can, send an update to the mailing list just on RefStack status and expectations. Actually, maybe as a general thing, RefStack PTL should be sending out status updates to the DefCore list. That seem appropriate?
That does seem appropriate. I'm assuming David's the PTL at this point. I think he is.
He is, for the time being. Yep. I'll take that as an
There's actually a decision here. There's two decisions.
Yep. Where are you putting them? Top or bottom? Oh, you got them at the bottom.
Crowdsourcing. Okay. So I think we might as well just document that. That makes sense. And then the other one is weekly updates.
Yeah.
Okay.
Weekly updates to where, Rob? Or to whom?
The DefCore list.
Okay.
We normally, just so you're aware, we normally meet just Thursdays from 2 to 3. So this we actually just completed a DefCore, a RefStack development meeting.
Yeah, I lurk in those usually when I can.
Yay. Great. All right. So I think what we're going to need help testing this stuff against clouds, and I think we're going to actually. One of the things I didn't put on here is future meeting cadence. We'll talk about that at the end. It's a good clip of help. Let's talk about the communication plan before we go to the TC interlock. That's all right.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of stuff that we have in flight right now. Let me go through what they are, and then we can drill into them. The first one is something we got board approval from at the last meeting, which was to talk through, to actually start publicizing the capabilities matrix. And that's really important. I'm going to ask the foundation to do another blog post and help publicize and go to the main list to have people look at the capabilities matrix and start giving us feedback. To do that, we have to have something written that explains what this is and helps do that. And what I would like to do is circulate a draft of that as a Google document through this committee. What I was hoping to do is have a first pass at it. Somewhere here it is. So I started an outline, and I was going to take a first pass at writing this and then distribute it through the committee as a Google Doc for additional review and edits. So I think I can get this done by mid next week for broader review.
So I guess the
Somebody else
only
want to
challenging.
Yep, go ahead.
The only challenge with that would be if we're going to rename any of the criteria, which sort of came up in the board meeting, to make them a little more self-explanatory, we should probably do that as part of pulling this public info doc together.
Yes. So the publication plan. So this is broader DefCore review next week by 3/31. Publication on 4/8, and that means we have to rename. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
And so the objective of that document, I keep flashing it up, I might as well. I don't have it shared to everybody's access yet. Do that. I'm going to take care of this after the meeting.
Okay.
But the objective of that document is to help people understand what we're doing and drive a response. Right? We want the community to have reviewed this and thought about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments about this? Oh, and if you're interested in being a co-author, I know for a fact that Mark Collier wants to be a part of this too, and
oh yeah.
So my plan is I'd like no more than 5 co-authors actively editing this document, and then we'll open it up to the DefCore for a full spectrum on that.
Is there anybody that you'd like to have as a co-author?
I am open to that, Sean. I know you and I have communicated on this stuff a bit. If I'm open to it. If it's more than 5, that's fine. I just too many people would be confusing.
I guess what I'm asking is, I'm certainly, if I can provide value, I'm certainly willing to help. But is there somebody out in the community that's not involved that you guys think would be useful as a co-author to build momentum and all that kind of fun stuff?
I'm not looking as much for the helping publicize. Just write the words.
Okay, so you're just looking for actual authors.
Actual
authorship. Yes, co-authors that will actually write words. And
all right, I get it.
Yeah, Sean, I think it may be helpful to have you involved because you were involved in the criteria subcommittee. Just because, a lot of what this is explaining, or Troy Toman because he worked so hard on the capabilities.
Yeah, I would say Troy.
Because we're trying to summarize that work.
Okay, happy to lend a hand.
And remember, everybody's going to get a shot at it. We're just trying to build up enough text and meaning in there that it's a faster edit for the broader audience.
Sure.
Okay. Driver test is something that came up from the board. I think this one's actually ready to circulate some more in the DefCore committee. So I'll send this out as a link with people to be able to comment. But this is really for John. I think we want to toss this to Jonathan and Boris.
Yes. And actually, so for those of you who were not at the board meeting, there's a parallel effort to resolve some confusion around the certification of third-party driver code that is either in or outside of trunk. And the board decision was to have Boris and Jonathan Bryce work with the DefCore committee to figure out how to combine forces somewhat around this. And so Rob has been working on drafting a doc that kind of recaps the board decision and the various efforts underway and sort of the next steps. And we'd like to get that out to the broader community as quickly as possible so folks that were waiting for results from the board meeting know what's going on.
And
Sounds
there's
good.
an active, and the press really sort of made hay with that effort and DefCore and a perceived lack of alignment. And so we addressed it in the board meeting, but we haven't publicized it. So.
Yeah. Well.
That response to the TC about designated.
Sorry, was that my outside voice?
The TC actually I was in the last meeting. Hopefully, some other people were too. Seems to be taking up the designated sessions. We pushed back a little bit. We didn't really respond, but Michael and Ann came back and said, "Hey, look, what they're looking for is reasonable." And they banded it back and forth. What I have is that's different. This one. We had identified 3 options in our last meeting. I just documented those. These have been given to Michael and Ann to review. What I would suggest we do is I'll open this up to the DefCore from a review perspective, and then we forward it to the TC before the next TC meeting.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So we're going to open to DefCore ASAP, forward to TC before next meeting. So I'm going to give people, because of the timing, this is going to have to be review deadline is Monday, 8 a.m. Sorry.
Yeah.
So forward to on Monday. And then I've been participating in the TC meetings, and I'll continue to do that. I think we're not making a recommendation. We can talk about that in our next topic to see if we want a recommendation.
We're describing the set of options that we see viable, right?
Right. We're describing this document basically has the 3 options, and I actually went so far when I drafted it, and this has been reviewed a little bit, to actually say, hey, there's implications about these options, right, based on our conversations from the last meeting. So we might want to go a little bit further in the next topic of the conversation. Any concerns or questions about that?
So I have had a chance to look at the doc already, and I think we've done a good job of describing sort of what the 3 options are, and I guess the only part about the language in that response that I think we could make stronger or might be worthwhile considering, I think probably this is the right action, is for the DefCore committee to respond to the TC based on the TC having responded to the committee.
Right.
The language in the committee is very much a dialogue back and forth between the committee and the TC, and it doesn't reflect the fact that we already have a board resolution that requires the board to publish designated sections. We've already voted unanimously on that as one of the principles of how we're going to define core. And so I don't want to have us or the TC spend a lot of time around false dialogue in a sense of saying, well, we could compromise in some way. Well, we can't. We actually already had a board vote. We've already had years of discussion. And so the alternative to the DefCore committee responding would be to go back to the board and have the board respond to the TC and say, is there an issue in how this was presented? Was the language unclear? Would you prefer if this was a direct board to TC conversation without DefCore in the middle? Would that feel you more comfortable? Do you just never want Josh in the room? But to come back to the fact that the board has already voted on this. It's already done from the board standpoint. So we're going to continue with designated sections. Would you like to be involved in defining that since it falls in your domain, or would you like us to go ahead and do it?
You're jumping topics a little bit, but
sorry. Okay.
That's all right.
You're right.
I mean, you're
the
lining
substance
out,
of the
you're
doc
lining
as
this
opposed
out
to
for
the
the next
complex.
thing. I think it's reasonable.
Because I mean, what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to point out, like,
that's
I'd like
fine.
to.
Go ahead.
No, I think you're right. I don't want us to be responding to them with the authority of the board, but I'd like us to be referring to the fact that we're acting under the authority of the board and we're trying to do something the board has already voted on doing. And not get into, because what we're really, they're treating us as if it's you and I having a conversation with the TC, and they're saying, well, we're an elected body and we think it should be done this way. We're like, well, actually, a different elected body, which is senior to you, already voted on this. We're just the pointy end of the stick.
Yeah,
you know what would be better?
So
this is Ann. I think it'd be better if the response back to the TC answered the questions posed, because that's all the TC is looking for. Is like, guys, we need more guidance. We don't really know what you want. How granular and specific? How limiting? Are backports allowed? Do we care about pluggable? So I would love to see. Like, I don't think the 1, 2, 3 response is. I think it's still going to slow us down. So maybe answer line 30, answer line 35.
Well, so I don't know what line 30 and what line 35 you're referring to, because all I saw from the TC was an official response that said, we don't believe in the approach of designated sections. We think you should go off and deal with API compatibility and come back.
I think
there was no questions about backporting. There was no questions about needing further guidance. There was a, we don't believe you're doing the right thing. We think you should go do something different response.
That wasn't the intent. I really think you just skipped to the end, because there are some pretty specific questions that we need guidance on.
And Ann, I appreciate that. I think you're definitely right. And my request has been that we would set up the interactive meeting with an Etherpad, pull those questions up, and then discuss the answers interactively. Because I don't want us to have more emails back and forth on this point and that point. I think that if we just sat down with it, we could answer those questions in a reasonable way.
Yeah, what I'm afraid of is you're not going to get the entire TC's attention. You're going to get me and Michael. So we might as well do that, right?
Yeah. So this is Michael, right? I think part of the problem is this is a truly horrible time of the release cycle to be getting the TC's undivided attention for a block of time, right? A bunch of them are very, very busy. And I think also, to be completely honest, a bunch of them think, well, some of them think that the meeting will devolve into being yelled at. And when they're very busy, they're not super enthused about signing up to be shouted at for an hour.
I understand their concern. I think that's not a good reason to skip having the voice meeting, because the voice meeting would resolve this. And if it's just the two of you, then you guys are their official proxies. I really don't want to have more back and forth email exchanges, because I feel like the temperature of those email exchanges is way too high. That a collaborative meeting where we sit down and answer the questions and talk through the options seems like a much faster way to resolve this. Less misunderstanding, more joint effort. I don't understand the resistance. If it's Josh, then I'll ask Josh not to participate, and we can have other members of the network committee.
No, I seriously, it's just that it's a very busy time, and this request came in oddly, and we're trying to clarify because we're tech nerds, and we don't have enough direction to do anything but draft what we did. And that was with probably 6 or 8 of us working on it and everybody voting on it. And so, yeah, I don't think it's anything but that, because
I would appreciate, rather than just sending back an email response, sitting down with you guys and talking it through so that we come up with something that we think is going to make sense. Because you guys know the personalities and the people and the issues better than we do. And so I think that just seems like a more equitable way to solve it. I mean, I'm happy to write back to an email, but
So certainly I think there's no harm in having, I don't know what to call it, a pre-meeting where, say, you know, Anne, Rob, Josh, whatever, and I sit down and say, hey, you know, what do we want to say to the TC? But I just think if you try and get the 15 or whatever it is people in the TC in a room for an hour, you're not going to get a conclusive outcome at the end. I don't think the TC has. One of the things the original response was trying to say is, I don't think the consensus in the TC is strong enough for people to be able to talk about actual implementation. I think even with a board of directors motion passed, there are members of the TC who don't have enough of the background to understand the problem that's being attacked and why it's being attacked in this way. So their inclination is going to be to stop and say, hey, why are you taking this approach, not this other approach? You can kind of see it with the Marconi thing that was happening this week, right? A TC member noticed this thing, finally, that's been around for a long time and said, hey, just a second, I don't understand the fundamental design. That's what these people are inclined to do if they don't understand, they're going to stop and say, whoa, what's the underlying premise here? Right.
And I don't have any problem going through and doing that. I don't think that answering that question is that conducive to an IRC chat. So, I mean, because we've produced material on that, right? I can retype it.
What's the deadline from the board? When has the board said we need this for, I don't know, presumably Icehouse, right?
We need it'd be nice to have by the summit, because I think that's when there's going to be a lot of attention on it. My preference would be that it would be done, that we have some basis at about the same time as we publicize the criteria, because I think that those things are going to draw attention to it. And I would ask that we could do this in phases, like look at the principles that define designated sections and agree to those, and then go into the details a little bit. So step back to principles. And I have a draft of that. Josh did some principles. I'm trying to remember where it was. We had a link for it.
It's an Etherpad doc, yeah.
And I would say, this is Sean, I would say that having that understanding and agreement between the TC and the board is kind of critical to have before the scoring information starts going out. That's going to really be confusing for people if they don't know why, or there's confusion about whether or not what this is. It's going to be not good.
Yeah, so like another question I think that the TC would have is there any need to add additional Tempest tests for the scoring you propose to do for Icehouse, or do you believe that Tempest has enough coverage for what you want at the moment?
We clearly believe it does not. That's been a topic multiple times. It is gapped in many ways. But
okay, so who's actually going to extend Tempest? Is there going to be an ask that the CC finds people to actually type out tests, or does DefCore somehow have people lined up to do that work?
We don't have people lined up to do that work. It's a gap. It's a gap.
I mean, the nice thing about the side effect of doing DefCore this way is that the motivation to produce tests falls onto the folks who would like to see those capabilities be must-have. And so it's sort of the natural pressure of, yeah, you would like to see the code that you contributed be required to be deployed in every OpenStack environment, and that would be awesome, but without sufficient test coverage, it cannot be considered. And that just naturally comes out of the way the criteria and capability scoring is being done. So the hope would be that we would never be coming to the TC and saying, you need to go find people to do test coverage. That should be a natural pressure.
Okay, so for example, with the Icehouse stuff that you want to talk about at the summit, if there's tests missing in a particular area, that will stop that area from being required for DefCore for Icehouse, is that correct?
Correct. It cannot be a must-have capability if there's not test coverage.
Okay, right. But so there's no plan to frantically add Tempest tests between now and the the Juno Summit?
No.
Correct. There will very likely be an outcry of the small amount of capabilities that are must-have in this initial set of scoring, and the response from the DefCore will be, if you would like to see capabilities be considered for must-have, probably they need more test coverage, go write some tests. But that's not going to be a comment directed to the TC. That's a comment directed at the user and developer community. I think we should be able to generate a lot more folks contributing to Tempest, which is a side effect I'd like to see.
And I would...
Sorry. Go.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I would just add that the lack of test coverage in some areas is not hidden. People know about it. I've gotten feedback from that on a variety of different ways. And the fact that we've kind of managed to get this far with having these gaps is fine, but we need to start filling these gaps, and this is just a good way of highlighting the need. And we will be rewarded. It will be painful in the short run, but we will be rewarded, because then people won't be able to say, hey, look, there's all these gaps, because they're going to be glaring in everyone's face, where right now they're hidden. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Look, what I was going to say is, look, this just raises a couple of concerns for me. The first is, I'm not completely clear on how Tempest feels about the feature freeze, but I imagine they're under the gun trying to land a release. And whilst they might not have a particular problem with it, with new tests being added at the moment, I'd be very surprised if they have the review bandwidth to do them. If the tests fail for things that are about to be released, that's obviously bad, but I'm not sure that we have the dev bandwidth to actually go through and fix bugs we've only just discovered. We'd probably deal with them as a backport after the release at this point, I would think. So I'm a little bit worried about anything that's going to cause a burst of Tempest tests to appear that need review and landing, and that may or may not pass, in our test environments, and that will then cause, bugs that we should definitely fix but don't have the time to fix right now. The other concern is there's also a bunch of tests that don't run in the gate, because the gate only runs with a single compute node, for example. So, as a concrete example, Nova Live Migration is not tested in the gate, and therefore we probably believe that the Tempest tests are broken. Certainly, we know that we lack sufficient coverage in that area. So I imagine there are bits of Tempest where we're missing the coverage we need for DefCore because of gate limitations. And gate limitations are hard to fix, and you're going to get zero traction changing the gate at this point in the release cycle.
Right. And one of the things to remember in all this is that we're working back in time. So today we're looking at Havana, and a lot of the questions you're asking are not issues in Havana, because the code is relatively old. So we can get through this first pass without trying to create a frantic rush, because nobody's adding tests for Havana right now. And that's what we...
That was kind of one of my original questions, right? So when a piece of paper goes to vendors saying, hey guys, you have to comply with this, will that piece of paper say, and the compliance we're talking about is for Havana, or is Icehouse the first release where we're going to use this compliance model?
The first release where we'll actually be doing it concurrent with the release will be Juno. We're doing Havana now. We're scoring against Havana now. And the goal is to score against Icehouse after Icehouse release by about 90 days, and to catch up by Juno. So we'll have two full releases where the notion of what's must-have comes out quite a bit after the release does, which is, partly to streamline some of these issues around how do we accept tests into Tempest, and when does code freeze happen for the test suite, and is it actually effective? The self-certification efforts using RefStack to run these things, not including tests that don't run in gate, does that all get dealt with? So I hear a lot of concerns you have about the process as a whole and the mechanisms that we're using to do capabilities-based scoring using testing, all of which I think would be great conversation to have jointly between the TC and the board around DefCore, but none of which is really specific to the designated sections questions.
Sure.
In other words, I continue to hear from the TC that you don't like the way we're doing this, therefore you don't want to talk about designated sections. And I agree if I'm trying to be very relaxed. I agree that we should for sure have these conversations. I would really like us to be having these conversations. And, my frustration with it is just that I have been trying to get the attention of the TC on this issue since I left the TC some years ago to have exactly these conversations. And so I hear from you now that you are too busy, which I can understand, release deadline and future freeze and everything else. But you were not too busy continuously. You're just too busy now. And so I guess the challenge is we don't have another time when we can do this, and we would like the TC to be involved in that discussion. But what we really need to talk about right now is the designated section stuff.
Sure, although I think
because the rest of it is still flexible. Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't say, or certainly didn't mean to say just then that, the TC refuses to do designated sections. I guess what I'm saying is I'm worried about some process issues, but I think we could do that in parallel, right? I feel like DefCore needs to kind of really soon go to the Tempest PTL and be like, hey man, we're going to encourage people to add tests to your thing. Is there anything that we should be aware of that might cause us to be surprised? And if you turn around and say, and we think that these things are going to appear sometime in the period between iTouch release and 90 days after, then that's actually a relatively quiet period for them, I would think. So that's probably not too bad. But I think minimizing surprise would involve getting the Tempest PTL to be aware that suddenly a bunch of people are going to appear, and so he's going to have enough review bandwidth and stuff like that.
I mean, to be fair, I actually sat in the summit sessions with the Tempest PTL at the last summit, and we talked about this. Maybe Robert doesn't remember, but I mean, we put this on people's radar then, and I appreciate it's been a long time. We're actually starting to put things in front of people in very very concrete ways now, and they're going to re-ask the same questions, and we're going to have to reevaluate this. Totally makes sense. We know that. We're trying to be as concrete as possible, as fast as possible, and
sure.
I think that's the only answer.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is the plan is a lot more concrete than it was last summit, and the Tempest team operates in what I'd like to call a target-rich environment, right? They've been dealing with incessant gate breakages, so they've probably simply dropped off their radar. So all we need to do is bring it back up to the list of things that they're actively thinking about to give them a heads up that it's going to appear soon.
Yeah,
and and we're counting on you and Anne to help carry that ball for us.
Sure. Look, I'm happy to start an email thread. The other problem, I guess, is that we actually don't know who the Tempest PTL is for the period where you're proposing to add these tests, right? Because we haven't had the election yet.
Right. Remember, we're not adding tests. We're just leveraging the ones the community has put in.
Well, yes and no, right? Because you're also encouraging vendors to add tests for things they think should be part of the compliance requirements.
Well, that's a good problem to have.
Be something we have always been encouraging vendors to do. The logic has always been, hey, if you want to contribute code and you're not contributing tests for it, the code doesn't exist. If it is not tested, it does not exist. And so the reality of us being more strict about that is saying, hey, we told you if it wasn't tested, it doesn't exist. It turns out now we're actually going to tell the world not to use that code because there's no test. That is a conversation we've always been having. So I agree we should give the Tempest PTL a heads up and be like, guys, we're going to get really serious and start really yelling at the vendors to contribute tests. But we have been telling them to do that the entire time. And Huawei is a great example. When Huawei showed up and said, hey, we're going to apply for gold membership, what should we do to be credible? The first thing I told them in person was, you should go write some tests. And that's exactly what they did. They added a bunch of people contributing to Tempest in the last couple of months before their gold membership application came up in front of the board. So, I mean, it's still the same conversation we've always been having.
Cool. Yeah, I agree these tests are important, and I agree we should have them. I think any lever we can use to force vendors to contribute specifically to testing and documentation, I find exciting. It will still have an impact on the Tempest team, right? So they still have to review those Huawei tests, and presumably the tests in the gate start running longer because they're running more tests, and so we need more nodes and blah, 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 right? There are some knock-on effects we need to mechanically work through. They're not the showstopper.
And you're also making an assumption that we or trying not to make, which is that the tests must be gate tests. Right? The Tempest team always has the choice to have tests that aren't required for gate, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They might not must pass tests. We don't have a criteria that says a must pass test has to be a gating test. That's one we didn't think to add. Maybe we need. But
well,
I don't know
like
if
I
change.
said, there are some technical constraints in the gate at the moment that might cause you pain there, right? Like if the feature a vendor is trying to add involves more than one compute node in Nova, you've just required them to add a thing that they can't add without doing all this work on a weird tangent. Yeah, look, like I said, I will start a mail thread between you guys and the current Tempest PTL, just so he's got an official heads up. And I don't think it's like the end of the universe or anything like that. I guess the other issue is going back to designated sections and working out a process for TC/PTLs to actually provide you with a list of those things. I think the Etherpad is a good way of progressing that. Have we actually told the PTLs that this is a thing that's going to happen to their projects? Like we've told the TC, but the TC doesn't contain all the PTLs.
I've talked to a bunch of the PTLs. I specifically talked to John Dickinson because he's the PTL I know that is not on the TC about this process. And he was very excited about being able to use designated sections to work with a larger ecosystem of vendors and get them to treat Swift as having a plug-in model in a particular fashion. So he saw it as a potentially empowering thing, and then he was quite upset that maybe it was going to be the TC designating sections and not PTLs. So, I mean, I would like to stay out of that debate because I think if I get involved, it will make it worse. So I think maybe the TC communicating with the PTLs is better than us doing it.
Yeah. I guess I just want to be clear on who you think is doing that work, so that the people who you think are doing that work are actually doing it. I would be very hesitant for the TC to pick designated sections in a project without talking to the PTL. Sometimes that conversation's implied because the PTL is on the TC. If they're not, then it should be explicit.
Yeah.
The problem is there's a lot of projects now, is what I was going to say. So if the TC was going to do that in its meetings, that's like weeks and weeks of meetings.
Wait, so the original request to the TC that Rob and I came with was we were asking the TC not to create designated sections, but to work with us to define a process to create designated sections with the expectation that because we have some time here and we're not trying to get this done on release schedule yet, that we could look at the capabilities that looked like they were going to be must-have and say, for instance, right now it doesn't look like there are any must-have capabilities in heat. So we probably don't need to worry about designated sections for heat yet because there may not be any must-have capabilities from heat, so it's a moot point. When it looks like the scoring for a particular release is raising a set of capabilities from a particular project to must-have status, we're going to need to be able to then lean in and say, okay, what are the designated sections?
Right.
Because it looks like this is going to be a must-have capability.
But I would add that if we can define the principles by which designated sections are identified, then every project can go through and scratch their head and ask themselves the question, what are my designated sections? And it becomes much easier. It's exactly like what we did with the criteria for picking capabilities, where we said these are the 13 things we think are important, and then when you look at them, you can make judgment calls, right? Even before anybody else scores it.
So that's actually interesting in the sense that the TC process for something going from incubated to integrated is we have a big checklist and we ask the project to sit down and answer effectively all these questions. And one of those questions could be, what bits of your thing do you think should be pluggable? To phrase the question slightly differently. And then,
yes.
So, the PTL and the team that wrote the thing says, well, this is our proposal. It goes to the TC as part of the integration review, and the TC says, well, we either agree or we disagree. Let's argue about it for a bit. And then that becomes a thing. And one of the things the TC is trying to do now is to reevaluate integration per release. Not in the we're going to only integrate you because we hate you sense, but in the, this is the bar we hold new projects to. Do all the existing projects also meet that bar, or do they need to catch up kind of sense? So we already have mechanisms of retrofit that to existing projects. Right. The problem is they're done in TC meetings. So our bandwidth for those is probably like 1, maybe 2 projects, depending on the size of the project per meeting. So you're talking about literally like the TC meeting bandwidth for a month kind of thing.
Right. I think one of the things that came out of our meeting, our last DefCore meeting, was that the time it's taken us to thrash on this, we could just define some basic principles, come up with a straw man, and with a small group, and then present that, and people will review it, sniff test it, and we'll probably be done. Because I did not expect when we started talking about this that it would create so much heat. Perhaps I should have, but I thought the TC would be much more ready and embracing of this.
It's complicated, right? So there are members of the TC who think, just every line of code should be designated. Vendors should just run what we write. But there are others that are worried about existing business models and whether or not we're going to break them. And so those people don't agree with each other yet, which is what we were saying when we said there's not a consensus on the TC. A really concrete example is, can I backport features from Juno to Icehouse and have my Icehouse product continue to meet the compliance requirements for DefCore? And, what if I'm not backporting? What if I'm adding a feature? Is additive change okay? And, I don't want to tell you what my answers are because I know my answers don't represent everybody on the TC.
Right. Yeah, and I believe the last consensus that went into the earlier DefCore process that came up with the designated section policy was that the code that was touching the designated section needed to have been submitted to one of any of the upstream OpenStack repositories in question. In other words, contributing it as a patch to stable or contributing as a patch to master and then backporting it in your own release was fine, even if it hadn't been accepted into stable, because it represents, and in fact, contributing as a patch and not making it through the review cycle might also still be fine, depending on the nature of your changes. The consensus at the time was, because otherwise people have to patch their product, and they may have to patch it in ways that they cannot get the upstream community to agree on in the short term, right? But that shouldn't be violation of the designated sections policy if it's made in best faith. And this is really the goal with all of this, is to define a best faith mechanism that does not require audit and does not rely on complicated legal footwork.
Mm-hmm. And I'm amused by your comments because I think that was actually my suggestion back in the day.
Yes, I believe it was. I believe it was.
But here's the thing, right? There are people on the TC who think I'm flat out wrong. I wasn't speaking for the TC when I made that suggestion. That was in one of the consultation-y, world tour meetings.
Yep.
And I haven't managed to convince everyone on the TC that I'm a genius and always right. I'm working on it.
Well, the good news is it doesn't matter, and this was something what I was sort of pointing out earlier. There's already a unanimous consensus vote by the board to accept that as the policy.
Or at least the board thinks I'm a genius. That's good.
Yeah.
So I want to be careful. I want to be careful with time. But I think what we're really doing right now is we're drilling down into the topics of our joint meeting.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to do is see if we can set a time for the joint meeting right now, and then I think we have more than an hour and a half worth of agenda. So can we come back though? Because what I heard Michael say, and Michael, correct me if I'm incorrect in this, is that the TC is not necessarily going to accept a joint meeting by voice, one, because they're busy, and two, because they don't want to be yelled at.
That's what I said. I don't have a solid read on how successful we'll be at scheduling this thing. The other thing is that TC never does it. So I don't have any data on what people's voice availability is like. Like, I don't know how many people are attending the TC IRC meetings whilst being in a physical meeting as well, kind of thing, on like an unrelated topic.
I don't think we're asking for 100%. I'm not asking for 100% participation. I think that if we had 4 TC members and 4 DefCore people show up, that would be, I'd consider that a quorum. I'd consider 2 and 2 a quorum, frankly.
Sure. So here's my suggestion. Why don't we email the TC and say, hey, when are you available for, a join me meeting or whatever, and have a really specific purpose for the join me meeting. Like, the purpose of this meeting is to come up with a straw man list of designated sections in this Etherpad. And then wait and see what people say. And if we can find a time when there's like 4 or 5 TC members available, or just pick the time where the maximum number of TC members are available and run with it.
Okay. I would like us to suggest a time here, rather than try and go through an email scheduling loop. Can we pick 1 or 2 times just to is the morning better than the afternoon?
Kind of by definition, 8 p.m. UTC is probably the best default time because that's the time of day when all the TC already meet. Okay. I wouldn't pick Tuesday or whatever it is the TC meets in UTC, but another day at that time is probably a time that's been proven that TC members are at least awake and near a computer.
Could we just do it at 9 p.m. UTC on Tuesday as a tentative?
There's a release meeting that you'll clash with.
No, the project cross meeting is that time.
Okay.
Let's make it another day than Tuesday.
We can't do it Monday. That's too soon. Wednesday or Friday?
I think there's a high likelihood that you'll get a reply back that says, oh, you clashed with this pre-existing meeting that we really need at the moment. But as a straw man, sure, let's pick Friday. My experience is if we don't take advantage of the focus time to say, hey, these are 2 tentative times, let's look at it and try and make it work. Okay. Well, why don't you propose those 2 days, Wednesday and Friday, and see how many votes in inverted commas you get for each, and pick the winning one with vote tally.
Considering their temperature on my request for this, I would prefer if you did.
All right.
If you don't mind asking.
All right, I'll send an email.
Thank you. I've made this request multiple times, and it has not been favorably received. So I think we have a pretty good agenda. We have agenda enough for 2 meetings, so we'll build up a full, complete agenda of everything, and then like we did for this meeting, we'll prune it back at the beginning. Spend the first 5 minutes pruning it back. All right, we have 5 minutes to go. This top level projects is what we used to call programs versus projects. There were people in the group who felt like it was really important. I actually wrote something talking about why we had said this. Josh, does anybody, I won't just say Josh, does anybody want to keep this going? We have a lot of people who are pretty passionate about that it needs to be addressed.
The programs and project stuff?
Well, I'm not calling it programs anymore, but the idea of top-level categories, thingamajigs that capture multiple projects.
I think that we can probably defer bringing it back for further discussion until after the first set of scoring comes out. I think some of the more recent changes to logo usage and potential rework of trademark policy and a bunch of other stuff may make this simpler. And I really feel like we have a whole bunch of different people coming at the same problem from different angles without coordinating. And I think us jumping isn't going to make it worse.
Okay. So I'm going to just say let's defer it till after the summit. We have enough on our plate. Do you have any concerns about me making the document I wrote public?
Has Mark Collier seen it?
Yes. Why don't I
Okay,
ask
then
Mark?
Yeah, ask Mark. I think it's fine as long as he's. I mean, frankly, I was really surprised that they've just changed the trademark logo usage policy without looping the board in at all. When we're in the middle of trying to resolve a whole bunch of these concerns around the use of marks. And so,
I think it's
sorry. Yeah, I just think if we continue to try and talk about the mark from a board perspective when the foundation staff are doing something different, we really need better coordination there. And so I would defer to Mark's opinion of whether it will help or hurt.
I'm just going to let's do this. We're dropping it until the next cycle.
So I think Mark believes he's doing it as being directed by the board. So I think maybe we've got a communication gap here.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I look back at the minutes and Jonathan's recap of the last 3 board meetings, I don't remember us ever suggesting that we collapse the OpenStack distro powered by OpenStack and built for OpenStack trademarks into one, and then send that out to all the vendors and get them to agree to it, right? But I already got the notification from the...
Yeah, we did too. We did too.
Did we?
Well,
What?
Well, we did talk about it.
When did we talk about it?
Sean doesn't remember. I think maybe you talked about it with Mark. I don't think the board talked about it.
No, I haven't talked to Mark directly at all.
I must have taken a nap because I don't remember that being discussed. It's entirely possible. I sometimes do sleep with my eyes open.
Yeah, if somebody can show me some minutes that mention even a
discussion
conversation.
Something, but I don't think we actually resolved that it should change without more review.
Yeah, I don't think we resolved it. I think that Mark may have said, okay, they want something done, and it's gone ahead. So.
No, I do believe it's Mark's purview and it's his authority to be able to do that. But the timing perhaps wasn't the best. I don't know, but
okay.
I do believe it's Mark's authority to be able to do that. I mean, he owns implementation of the trademark. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with the change. I just think it's just surprised me that it hadn't come up at the board because we have had so much discussion recently about the mark and the policy. So
right.
I'm pretty sure I would have remembered if we discussed it and had a resolution.
Sorry. So I'm not saying we had a resolution that said collapse the mark. We did talk about there being a lot of marks and confusions of the marks, but we didn't come out with any resolution that said collapse it down to one.
Yeah.
But that's anyway, not really the board's authority, is it? I mean, I don't believe it is.
The board owns any changes to the trademark policy. Absolutely. That is the purpose of the board. So, but this one didn't require a change of or let's say it's being executed without a change to the policy. It's being done as a change to the use of logo.
Right.
Which is confusing. I think it's actually adding
Here's
confusion because now I have a trademark license as an OpenStack distribution, but I'm not allowed to use a logo anymore that says OpenStack distribution. Anyway, it's fine.
Yeah.
But
do you mind dropping a link in here to the relevant?
It's not public. I got it as an email from Foundation staff to a vendor as part of my license.
Yeah, you got it because you're a licensee.
Yes, exactly. So the licensees have received notification of a change to the way the trademark policy is being exercised. That is not. I mean, yeah. Anyway, it is in the Foundation staff's purview, but it was surprising and somewhat confusing. So I don't want us to add more confusion to that when we're trying to actually resolve confusion.
No, I think that's a good decision. I certainly don't have any need to continue driving that one.
Yeah.
Until it makes our life complex again.
Yeah, I was the one whipping you, and I will stop whipping.
I also agree that there is an element of confusion that we're creating.
Yeah.
It makes our DefCore job harder, but it's not worth it.
Yeah.
All right. So next meeting.
Yep.
I believe we have a lot of things to continue discussing. I would say that we should have another meeting. I don't know if we can do it this week. The RefStack team is meeting Friday afternoon to talk about some the
Friday morning, I believe. Sorry, 7 a.m. tomorrow, Pacific.
Yes. 7 a.m. That's what it's set up.
Sorry. Oh, the criteria. So, yeah, there's a criteria meeting tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Yeah, and then there's the RefStack meeting. And then we need the RefStack PTL to send a status update out to DefCore committee so we can think about crowdsourcing data and the capabilities and when they're going to be done. And then I would propose we have our next DefCore full committee meeting after we've had a joint session with the TC, if that's going to happen soon, or in lieu of if it's not going to happen at all.
So, why don't we do this? Why don't we try to have it? There's a board meeting on the 3rd of April. We should definitely meet before then. I was going to suggest Tuesday at 2 p.m.
The 25th?
That's right after the technical committee meeting, the TC meeting, so that we could review. There'd be 2 TC meetings before then.
Yeah. The only thing is I can do that, but I can only stay till 2:40. So the timing's a little tight for me. Doing it a little earlier would be easier, but that's okay. I'll make it work.
I don't mind doing it earlier, and I don't mind if we want to do a morning session. I'm pretty flexible for that. Especially
can we make it the Wednesday morning instead, if that works for anyone?
I cannot do Wednesday morning.
Okay. And then we're into gold member conference call season on Thursday. And then RefStack on Friday. Okay, let's leave it at 2 on Tuesday, and I'll see what I can do to juggle.
Okay, I'm gonna.
The 25th, then we're talking about, right?
No, I have it as the 1st.
Oh, sorry. I see. You're going a week farther out.
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
know
that's
that
fine.
we need to.
Okay.
That's
that's
1st?
good.
90,
Perfect.
Let's try for 90 minutes on the 1st.
Yes, I'll put it in my calendar right now.
April Fool's Day. Perfect.
DefCore Elephant 7. Awesome. Rob, as always, thank you for driving the meeting and the agenda.
My pleasure.
Keeping everyone
Thank you all for being patient and participating. Look for the DefCore TCUP RefStack stuff, the test. We will be doing a roll call and making sure people have tried it at that next meeting.
Roger.
Right.
I mean, Rob.
Do you have a Rob?
Har har.
You screwed me up there. Do you have a date when you're going to send that out, Rob?
As soon as I have have done it successfully and have had like 2 or 3 people on my team do it, as soon as the RefStack team has said yes, then we'll do it. I don't know the date. It's as soon as we can. I think we're close. I wish I could be more definitive. I don't want to give false promises again.
No, I'm not pressuring you. I'm going to be on the road next week, and I just don't want to miss it.
Yep. We will call you personally. Make sure you don't miss it. We'll just call you every 10 minutes.
Yeah. I actually believe you, Joshua. Thanks.
All right. I gotta run. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Adios, amigos.
Thanks. Bye.